The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, and every head in the ballroom turned toward the Korean Mafia boss, who stood frozen in the center of 50 circling models. Jin-Woo Park, the most feared man in the Los Angeles underground, had just locked eyes with a black waitress carrying a silver tray, and something inside his chest cracked open like a fault line before an earthquake. The models in their $1,000 gowns whispered and leaned closer, their perfume choking the air, their manicured fingers reaching for his custom Armani sleeves, but he couldn't hear them anymore. All he could see was her. The waitress with the warm brown skin and natural coiled hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a basic white shirt and black vest that cost less than the cufflinks on his wrist, had smiled at him. Not the practiced, hungry smile of women who wanted his money or his power or his name in their mouths when they whispered to their friends. This smile was different. It was genuine, soft, accidental even, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, without asking permission, and it destroyed every wall he had built around his heart in 34 years of blood and violence and calculated cruelty. If you're wondering how a single smile can bring a dangerous man to his knees, stay with me, because this story will show you that some connections are stronger than bullets, deeper than loyalty, and more terrifying than any enemy you've ever faced. Jin-Woo didn't believe in love, didn't believe in softness, didn't believe in anything except power and respect and the cold comfort of fear in other men's eyes. But when that waitress smiled, his entire world tilted sideways and he forgot how to breathe. The fashion gala was supposed to be business as usual for Jin-Woo Park. Nothing more than another night of appearances and power plays dressed up in designer clothes and false civility. His organization controlled half the luxury import business in Southern California, moving everything from high-end vehicles to exclusive fashion pieces through channels that the law couldn't touch and rivals didn't dare challenge. He had walked into the Beverly Hills ballroom with his usual entourage, 3 men in black suits who kept their hands near their waist and their eyes on every exit, scanning the crowd of celebrities and socialites and fashion industry elite like predators watching a herd of prey. The models had started circling immediately, drawn to power the way moths fly toward flames that will burn them alive. They were beautiful, every single one of them, tall and sculpted and dressed in clothes that barely qualified as fabric. Their faces painted like works of art, their bodies moving with practiced grace that came from years of walking runways and posing for cameras. Jin-Woo had walked past all 50 of them without a single glance, his expression carved from stone, his dark eyes flat and emotionless, because he had learned long ago that beauty was just another weapon people used to get what they wanted. His assistant had whispered the names of important people he should acknowledge, designers who wanted his investment, models who came from families with connections to shipping routes and international trade. But Jin-Woo had nodded mechanically, his mind already on the deal he was planning with a corrupt customs official who controlled the port of Long Beach. Then he saw her. She was refilling champagne glasses at a corner table near the kitchen entrance, moving quietly through the crowd like she was trying to be invisible, her movements efficient and careful, her eyes downcast in that way service workers learn when they don't want to be noticed by people who think they're better. Jin-Woo watched her navigate around a group of laughing executives, saw her smile politely when someone handed her an empty glass without looking at her face, witnessed the way she straightened a croquette napkin on an abandoned table, even though nobody had asked her to, and something about her gentleness made his chest hurt in a way he didn't understand. She was pretty in a natural, unadorned way that made the models around him look like expensive mannequins. Her skin a rich dark brown that reminded him of warm earth after rain. Her lips full and soft, even without the gloss and paint the other women wore. Her body curved and real beneath her simple uniform. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped him. It was what happened when their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. She had looked up, probably feeling the weight of his stare, and her eyes went wide with surprise, then soft with something that looked almost like compassion, and then she smiled. It wasn't flirtation or manipulation or hunger. It was kindness. Pure, simple, human kindness offered freely to a stranger who didn't deserve it. And Jin-woo felt like he'd been shot in the heart with a bullet he never saw coming. His hand had opened without his permission, and the champagne glass he'd been holding crashed to the marble floor in an explosion of crystal and golden liquid that spread across the white stone like spilled sunlight. The models gasped and jumped back, their designer heels clicking against the floor, their voices rising in shock because Jin-woo Park didn't make mistakes, didn't lose control, didn't show weakness in front of anyone. His second in command, Marcus Chen, a black man who had been with the organization for 15 years and had seen Jin-woo execute traitors without blinking, stepped forward immediately, his hand inside his jacket where his gun rested against his ribs. "Boss, you good?" Marcus asked quietly, his eyes scanning the room for threats, for poison drinks, for anything that might explain why the most controlled man he'd ever known had just dropped a glass like a nervous teenager. Jin-woo couldn't answer. His throat had closed up, his pulse hammering in his ears, his entire body locked in place as he watched the waitress set down her tray and hurry toward him with a cloth napkin in her hand. She was coming closer. She was going to speak to him. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to walk away, to rebuild his walls, to remember that caring about anyone was the fastest way to die in his world. But his feet wouldn't move. The models had started talking again, their voices sharp with curiosity and jealousy, asking each other who she was and why he was staring at her like she'd just stepped out of his dreams and into his nightmare. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get that for you," the waitress said, kneeling down in front of him to clean up the broken glass, her voice soft and gentle with a slight southern accent that curled around her words like honey. Jin-woo looked down at the top of her head, at the small curls that had escaped her bun and framed her face, at her slender fingers carefully picking up pieces of crystal so he wouldn't cut himself on them, and he felt something break open inside his chest that he had kept locked away since he was a child, watching his father bleed out on a warehouse floor in Seoul. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, almost angry, because he was furious at himself for caring, for feeling, for wanting something he couldn't control or command or buy. She looked up at him, her eyes a warm brown that reminded him of comfort he'd never had, and she smiled again, smaller this time, almost shy. "Amara," she said simply, "Amara, right?" Jin-woo repeated her name silently in his mind, tasting it, memorizing it, knowing even then that he was making a mistake that would cost him everything he'd built. Marcus stepped closer, his expression carefully neutral, but Jin-woo could see the concern in his old friend's eyes, the warning that said this was dangerous that attachments were liabilities, that the last man who loved someone in their world had watched her die in his arms during a rival's revenge. Jin-woo knew all of this. He had learned these lessons in blood and fire and loss. But when Amara stood up and handed him a fresh napkin, her fingers brushing against his for just a second, he knew he was already lost, already falling, already breaking every rule that had kept him alive for 3 decades. And he didn't care. If you want to know what happens when the most dangerous man in Los Angeles starts hunting for a waitress who doesn't know his name, hit that like button and subscribe. Because next chapter will show you that some obsessions are more dangerous than any war, and some women carry secrets that can bring empires to their knee. Amara Wright stood in the staff bathroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel 3 hours after the gala had ended, staring at her reflection in the mirror and trying to stop her hands from shaking. The Korean Mafia boss had sent 12 dozen white roses to the hotel with a note that simply said her name in handwriting so perfect. It looked like violence contained in ink, and the manager had pulled her into his office to ask what kind of trouble she'd brought to his establishment. She had no answer because she didn't understand what had happened on that ballroom floor. Didn't know why a man who looked like he could buy and destroy entire cities had stared at her like she was water and he was dying of thirst in a desert made of money and blood. The roses were everywhere now, filling the staff room until the other servers couldn't walk without crushing petals under their feet. The heavy scent making her head spin and her heart race because nobody had ever given her flowers before. Not even her ex-boyfriend who had stolen her savings and disappeared into the Atlanta night 2 years ago. Amara pressed her palms against the cold sink and forced herself to breathe. Forced herself to remember that men like that didn't notice women like her for good reasons, that fairy tales were just stories people told to forget how cruel the real world could be. But she could still feel the weight of his dark eyes on her skin, could still see the way something had broken open in his expression when she smiled, could still remember the electric shock that had run through her body when their fingers touched over a champagne-soaked napkin. If you think this is just another romance, stay right here, because what's coming will teach you that some men don't know how to love without destroying, and some women are stronger than the monsters who hunt them. The next morning, Amara walked into her second job at a small diner in Koreatown, exhausted from a sleepless night, spent thinking about roses and dangerous men, and the way her life had suddenly become complicated in ways she couldn't afford. She needed both jobs to pay for the tiny studio apartment she shared with her younger sister, needed every dollar to cover the community college classes that were supposed to give them a better future, needed the stability and invisibility that came from working hard and keeping her head down and never drawing attention to herself. Her sister, Zara, was only 19 and studying nursing, smart and sweet, and completely dependent on Amara. Since their mother had died from cancer 3 years ago, and their father had walked out when they were children, leaving them with nothing but each other and a determination to survive. Amara had promised their mother she would take care of Zara, would make sure she graduated and had opportunities that didn't involve serving rich people who never looked at her face. And she had kept that promise by working 16-hour days and sacrificing everything that looked like a personal life. The diner was owned by an elderly Korean woman named Park, who treated Amara like a granddaughter and paid her under the table because Amara's immigration status was complicated, her mother having brought them from Jamaica when Amara was 12 and the paperwork never quite getting finished before she died. So when Amara pushed through the diner door and saw Jin-woo Park sitting in a corner booth wearing a black suit, that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Her first thought wasn't romance or excitement. It was terror. Pure, ice-cold terror that flooded her veins and made her want to run. He looked different in the morning light that streamed through the diner windows, less like a dangerous fantasy and more like a real threat. His handsome face expressionless and unreadable, his dark eyes tracking her every movement with an intensity that made her feel naked and exposed. Marcus Chen sat across from him, the black man with intelligent eyes who had been at the gala, and 2 other men in suits occupied the booth behind them, their backs to the wall, their eyes on the door, their hands resting on the table in a way that suggested weapons were close. Mrs. Park was behind the counter, her wrinkled face tight with worry, and she caught Amara's eye and gave a small shake of her head that said, "Be careful, be smart, don't make trouble." Amara wanted to walk right back out the door, wanted to call in sick, wanted to pretend she'd never smiled at a stranger across a crowded ballroom. But her feet carried her forward because she needed this job and because running from dangerous men only made them chase harder. "Good morning," she said quietly, pulling out her order pad with hands that trembled slightly, trying to sound professional and detached even though her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "What can I get you?" Jinwoo didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes that seemed to see straight through her uniform and her careful politeness and all the walls she'd built to protect herself from a world that had never been kind. "Sit down," he said finally, his voice low and commanding, with an accent that turned his words into something between a request and a threat. "We meet." Amara glanced at Mrs. Park, who gave another small shake of her head, and then back at Jinwoo, and she felt anger start to burn through her fear because she was tired of men thinking they could control her, tired of being invisible until someone decided she was worth noticing, tired of being poor and powerless and always one mistake away from losing everything. "I'm working," she said, keeping her voice steady, even though every instinct screamed at her to be careful, to be submissive, to not provoke a man who looked like he'd killed people for less than disrespect. "If you want to order food, I can help you. If you want conversation, you'll have to wait until my shift ends at 3. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh or a warning, and the 2 men in the booth behind them shifted slightly, and Jinwoo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that looked almost like surprise. Nobody talked to him that way. Amara could see it in his posture, in the sudden tension that rippled through his bodyguards, in the way the entire diner seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But instead of getting angry, instead of making threats or flexing his power, Jinwoo did something that shocked everyone in that room. He smiled. It was small, barely there, just a slight curve of his lips that transformed his whole face and made him look younger and almost human. And it was more dangerous than any weapon because it made Amara's heart stutter in her chest and her resolve start to crack. 3 o'clock then, Jinwoo said, standing up from the booth with fluid grace that reminded Amara of predators she'd seen in nature documentaries, all controlled power and patient hunger. He reached into his jacket and Amara flinched instinctively, her body remembering every news story about violence in Koreatown, about gang wars and territory disputes, and people who disappeared without a trace. But he only pulled out a business card, black and expensive with silver lettering, and placed it on the table between them. "When you're ready to understand why I can't stop thinking about your smile, call me," he said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice now, something vulnerable that didn't match the dangerous man in the expensive suit. Then he walked out, his bodyguards falling into formation around him, and Amara was left standing there with a business card in her shaking hands and Mrs. Park rushing over to ask if she was okay, if she knew who that man was, if she understood the danger she was in. Amara looked down at the card, at the name Jinwoo Park, and a phone number, and nothing else. And she thought about roses and smiles, and the way her life had just become infinitely more complicated. She thought about Zara and college tuition, and the precarious balance of their existence. She thought about her mother's last words, about being careful, about not trusting men who promised things they couldn't deliver. But most of all, she thought about the look in Jinwoo's eyes when he said he couldn't stop thinking about her. And despite every logical reason to throw the card away and forget this ever happened, Amara slipped it into her pocket and felt the weight of it there, like a secret that might save her or destroy her. And she had no idea which. Don't go anywhere, because next chapter is where everything explodes and you'll discover that Jinwoo's enemies have been watching. Amara's past is about to catch up with her in the worst way possible. And when these two worlds collide, blood will spill and choices will be made that can never be undone. Mash that subscribe button now, or you'll miss the chaos. The bullet shattered the window of Amara's studio apartment at exactly 11:37 at night, missing Zara's head by 3 inches and embedding itself in the wall above the futon, where both sisters had been sitting moments before. Amara grabbed Zara and threw them both to the floor, her heart exploding in her chest, her sister's screams cutting through the sudden silence like knives, and all she could think was that this was her fault. That smiling at a dangerous man had brought violence to the only person she had left in this world. Glass rained down on them like deadly snow, glittering in the streetlight that filtered through the destroyed window, and Amara covered Zara's body with her own, waiting for more shots, waiting for death, waiting for the consequences of being noticed by someone who lived in a world where bullets were the language of business. But no more shots came. Instead, she heard tires squealing on the street below, heard car doors slamming, heard men shouting in Korean and English, and then her apartment door exploded inward with a crash that sounded like the end of everything she tried to build. Jinwoo Park stood in her doorway, surrounded by 6 armed men, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, his expensive watch catching the light, and there was blood on his hands that Amara knew wasn't his own. If you're wondering how fast your life can change from normal to nightmare, keep watching, because this chapter will show you that protection and possession are sometimes the same thing. And when a mafia boss decides you're his to keep, the whole world becomes a battlefield with you trapped in the middle. Get up, Jinwoo commanded, striding across her tiny apartment like he owned it, his eyes scanning every corner for threat, his body moving with violent grace that spoke of training and experience and countless situations exactly like this one. Marcus Chen was right behind him, gun drawn, checking the bathroom and the small kitchenette, while 2 other men took positions at the window and door. Amara couldn't move. She was frozen on the floor with Zara sobbing against her chest, both of them covered in glass fragments that cut tiny lines across their skin. Both of them trying to understand how their quiet life had turned into an action movie in the span of 1 bullet. I said get up, Jinwoo repeated, and his voice was harder now, sharp with authority and something that sounded like fear. And he reached down and physically lifted Amara to her feet with hands that were surprisingly gentle despite the blood that stained her. Zara scrambled up too, her young face wet with tears, her nursing school textbooks scattered across the floor, next to the broken glass, and she looked at her older sister with eyes that demanded answers Amara didn't have. "Who are you?" Zara asked Jinwoo, her voice shaking but angry because she had inherited their mother's fire along with her determination to never be. "Why are people shooting at us?" What did Amara do? Jinwoo ignored her completely, his attention fixed on Amara, with an intensity that made her feel like prey being evaluated by a predator who couldn't decide whether to protect her or consume her. "Pack a bag," Jinwoo said, his hands moving over Amara's arms and shoulders and face, checking for injuries with a familiarity that should have made her pull away, but instead made her want to lean into his touch, because she was terrified and exhausted and so tired of being strong, alone. "You have 2 minutes. Clothes, documents, anything you can't replace. Leave everything else." Amara found her voice finally, found the anger that had been buried under shock and fear, and she shoved his hands away from her body, even though part of her wanted them back. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, her southern accent thicker now with emotion, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and rage. "You did this. Someone shot at my baby sister because of you, because I was stupid enough to smile at you, because you couldn't just leave me alone." Jinwoo's expression didn't change, didn't show guilt or apology or anything except cold calculation. And that made Amara even angrier because he wasn't even pretending to care about the damage it caused. "Someone shot at your sister because my enemies found out I've been looking for you," he said flatly, stating facts like they were discussing the weather instead of attempted murder. "They know I want you, so now you're leverage, you're a target, and if you stay here they'll come back with more than one bullet, and next time they won't miss." Mark stepped forward his deck, his expression sympathetic in a way his boss's wasn't, and he addressed Zara directly. "He's telling the truth, young lady. That shot came from the Kim organization. They're Jinwoo's biggest rival, and they just declared war using you as the opening move." Zara looked between Marcus and Jinwoo and her sister, her intelligent mind clearly processing the insanity of their situation. And then she did something that surprised everyone in that destroyed apartment. She grabbed her backpack, started shoving clothes and her laptop and textbooks inside with shaking hands, and said, "We're going. Amara, pack. Now." Amara stared at her baby sister, the girl she'd raised and protected and sacrificed everything for, and felt betrayal burn in her throat like acid. "Zara, no, we can call the police, we can act." But Zara cut her off with a look that was pure steel wrapped in tears. "The police can't stop people like this," she said quietly, gesturing at the bullet hole in their wall, at the shattered window, at the armed men standing in their living room like this was normal. "Mama didn't raise us to be stupid, Amara. These men have guns, they have money, they have power, and right now they're offering protection we can't get anywhere else." She turned to Jinwoo, her young face hard with the kind of wisdom that came from growing up poor and black and female in a world that saw all three as weaknesses to exploits. "What do you want from my sister? And don't lie to me, because I can smell bullshit from a mile away." Jinwoo looked at Zara for a long moment, and something like respect flickered across his face. "I want her safe," he said simply. "Everything else we'll figure out later." It wasn't a love confession or a promise of forever. It was a statement of fact from a man who had decided something and would move heaven and hell to make it happen. Consequences be damned. 20 minutes later, Amara and Zara were sitting in the back of a black Mercedes SUV with bulletproof glass and leather seats that probably cost more than their entire apartment's furniture combined, driving through Los Angeles toward a destination Jin Woo wouldn't name. Marcus was on the front passenger seat, coordinating with other vehicles through an earpiece, speaking in rapid Korean that Amara couldn't understand, but that sounded like military operations. Jin-woo sat next to her in the back, his body angled toward her like a shield, his jaw tight with tension, and every few seconds his eyes would flick to the side mirror, checking for tails. Zara had fallen into exhausted sleep against Amara's shoulder, her backpack clutched to her chest, and Amara stared out the window at the city lights, blurring past, and wondered how her life had become someone else's completely. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered finally, not looking at Jin-woo, but knowing he was listening to every word. "I didn't ask for roses or business cards or men with guns breaking into my home. I just smiled at you, that's all. One smile, and now my whole life is destroyed." Jin-woo was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer, but then his hand found hers in the darkness of the back seat, his fingers threading through hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him. "I know," he said, and his voice was rough with something that might have been regret. "I know you didn't ask for this, but I'm a selfish man, Amara. I saw something in your smile that I've been searching for my entire life, and I'm not strong enough to walk away from it, even though I should." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Even though you deserve better than a man who brings bullets instead of flowers." Amara wanted to pull her hand away, wanted to hate him, wanted to blame him for everything that had just happened, but she was so tired and so scared, and his hand was warm and solid and real in nights that felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The SUV pulled up to a gated mansion in the Hollywood Hills, all white stone and floor-to-ceiling windows and security that would make a prison jealous, and Amara realized with creeping horror that this was Jin-woo's home, his fortress, the place where he was taking her to keep her safe or keep her captive, and she wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Guards opened the gates. More guards stood at the entrance, and when Jin-woo helped her out of the car with Zara still half asleep against her, Amara saw a woman standing in the doorway who made her blood run cold. She was Korean, beautiful and elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older power, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than Amara made in a year, and she was looking at Amara with eyes that held murder and jealousy in equal measure. "So this is the waitress," the woman said in perfect English with just a hint of an accent, her voice dripping with "the little black girl who thinks she can take what's mine." Jin-woo's whole body went rigid, his hand tightening around Amara's, and Marcus actually stepped between them like he was preparing for violence. "Seo-yoon," Jin-woo said quietly, and there was warning in his voice that could have frozen fire. "Go home, now." But Seo-yoon just smiled, cold and sharp as broken glass, and Amara saw something in that smile that terrified her more than bullets ever could, because this was a woman who knew how to destroy people without ever pulling a trigger. You absolutely cannot miss next chapter, because you're about to find out exactly who Seo-yoon is, why she thinks Jin-woo belongs to her, and what happens when Amara discovers that the man who promised to protect her has been lying about something that could get them all killed. Hit that like button and subscribe right now, because the betrayal that's coming will leave you speechless. Amara sat on the edge of a bed that was bigger than her entire old apartment, watching dawn light filter through bulletproof windows that overlooked a city she no longer recognized, and listened to her baby sister crying in the bathroom, because Zara had finally broken under the weight of everything they'd lost in one night. The guest room Jinwoo had given them was decorated in shades of cream and gold, all expensive furniture and soft carpets, and the kind of luxury that felt like a prison when you hadn't chosen to be there. And Amara had spent the last 6 hours alternating between rage and fear and a hollow numbness that scared her more than either emotion. COU had left after Jinwoo had practically dragged her out of the mansion, their arguments echoing through marble hallways in Korean that Amara couldn't understand, but that sounded like years of history and pain and claims that went deeper than simple jealousy. Marcus had explained some of it after Jinwoo had disappeared into his office to make calls, had told Amara that Seo Yoon was daughter of Jinwoo's former mentor, a man who had brought Jinwoo to America and built him into the powerful boss he was today before dying 2 years ago, and leaving behind a daughter who believed she was owed a marriage proposal and a share of everything Jinwoo had become. If you think you know where this story is going, think again, because this chapter is going to break your heart before it shows you that sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is demand the truth from a man who has built his entire life on beautiful lies. Amara pressed her palms against her tired eyes and tried to figure out how she had gone from invisibility to being trapped between a Korean mafia boss who looked at her like she was oxygen and a woman who looked at her like she was a disease that needed to be eliminated. Bathroom door opened, and Zara emerged with swollen eyes and a determined expression that Amara recognized from their childhood, from every time life had tried to break them, and they decided to break it right back. "We need to talk," Zara said, sitting down next to her sister on the massive bed, her voice hoarse but steady. "Really talk, not just survive. Because I need to know if you have feelings for him, or if this is just some weird hostage situation where we're supposed to be grateful to the man who brought violence into our lives." Amara wanted to lie, wanted to say she hated Jinwoo and everything he represented, wanted to pretend that her heart didn't skip every time he looked at her with those dark eyes that saw past every defense she'd ever built. But Zara deserved honesty, deserved more than the half-truth and protective silence Amara had been hiding behind since their mother died. "I don't know what I feel," Amara admitted quietly, her southern accent soft with exhaustion and confusion. "He scares me, Zara. Not because I think he'll hurt me, but because when he touches me, I forget to be scared. When he looks at me, I feel seen in a way I've never felt before. Like I matter. Like I'm more than just a tired woman working 3 jobs to keep us alive." She paused, her throat tight with emotion. "And that terrifies me more than bullets, because I can't afford to feel things for a man who lives in a world where people shoot at you for smiling at the wrong person." She took her sister's hand, squeezing tight, and for a moment they were just 2 young black women who had survived their mother's death and their father's abandonment and poverty and immigration limbo and every other thing the world had thrown at them, holding on to each other because it was all they'd ever had. Jinwoo found them like that an hour later, sitting together on his guest bed, and something in his expression shifted when he saw their clasped hands and tear-stained faces, like he was remembering what it meant to have family, to have people who would choose you even when the world fell apart. He had changed into a simple black t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly disheveled, his feet bare on the expensive carpet, and he looked younger and more vulnerable than Amara had ever seen him, less like a mafia boss and more like a man who had forgotten how to sleep. "Zara," he said quietly, addressing her sister with a respect that surprised Amara. There's a room down the hall with a TV and streaming services, and anything you might want to eat. Marcus's wife, Nicole, is there. She's been waiting to meet you. She's also black, also knows what it's like to love someone in this world. And she's someone you can trust. It wasn't as a dismissal so much as an offer of escape, and Zara looked at Amara for permission before nodding and standing up. But before she left, she turned to Jinwoo with an expression that was pure protective fury. "If you hurt my sister," she said clearly, her young voice carrying the weight of every promise she'd ever made, "I don't care how many men you have or how much money you've got. I will find a way to make you regret it for the rest of your life." Jinwoo didn't laugh or dismiss her threat. He just nodded once, accepting it like a vow, and said, "I would expect nothing less." When they were alone, Amara stood up from the bed and walked to the window, putting distance between herself and Jinwoo, because she needed space to think, needed air that wasn't filled with his expensive cologne and dangerous presence. Who was she really? Amara asked, not looking at him, watching the sun rise over Los Angeles, like the city was waking up to a different world than the one she'd known yesterday. Seo Yoon. Marcus said she was your mentor's daughter, but there's more to it than that. I could see it in the way she looked at you, in the way you looked at her. So tell me the truth, Jinwoo. All of it, because I'm not stupid, and I'm not desperate enough to be lied to by a man who brought bullets to my door. She heard him move closer, felt the heat of his body behind her, but didn't touch her. And she was grateful, because if he touched her, now she might shatter. Her father saved my life when I first came to America, Jinwoo said quietly, his voice rough with old pain and older debts. I was 17, alone, running from enemies in Seoul who had killed my family. He took me in, taught me everything, made me part of his organization, treated me like the son he never had. And when he was dying of a heart attack 2 years ago, he asked me to take care of Seo Yoon, to marry her, to keep her safe, and give her the life he couldn't anymore. Amara closed her eyes, feeling that confession land in her chest, like a stone in deep water. And what did you say? Jinwoo was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was barely above a whisper. I said yes. I promised a dying man I would marry his daughter. And then I met you, and every promise I ever made stopped mattering. Amara turned around then, needing to see his face, needing to know if this was manipulation or truth, or something in between that she didn't have a name for yet. Jinwoo stood 3 feet away from her, his hands shoved in his pockets like he was forcing himself not to reach for her, his dark eyes filled with something that looked like genuine anguish. I haven't been with Seo Yoon romantically, he continued, the words coming faster now like he needed to get them all out before she stopped listening. We've never been engaged officially, never shared a bed, never been anything except 2 people trapped by a dead man's wishes and organizational politics. But she believes I belong to her, believes my promise to her father means I owe her my life, and she's not wrong to feel betrayed. He took a step closer, and Amara could see the exhaustion carved into his handsome features, could see the weight of choices he'd made and promises he'd broken written across his face. I should walk away from you. I should honor my word and marry her and let you go back to your life. But I can't, Amara. I physically cannot make myself walk away from you, and I've tried. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I've tried so fucking hard. Amara felt tears burning in her eyes because this was worse than lies. This was complicated truth that had no easy answers. This was a man telling her he wanted her enough to break promises to dying fathers, and she didn't know if that made him honest or selfish or both. What happens now? She asked, her voice small in the huge bedroom. Her whole future suddenly balanced on the edge of his answer. Jinwoo looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, like everything else could burn as long as she was safe, and said words that would change everything. Now I choose you. I break my promise. I start a war with Seo Yoon's family. I lose allies and respect, and probably half my organization. And I do it all knowing that you might wake up tomorrow and decide I'm not worth the cost. That this whole mess isn't worth one smile in a ballroom. He finally closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her want to weep. But you are worth it, Amara. You're worth every consequence. Don't you dare scroll away, because final chapter is the finale, and you need to see how this ends. Will Amara choose safety or love? Will Seo Yoon accept defeat or burn everything down? Will Jinwoo survive the war he's starting? And will these two broken people finally get their happy ending? Or will the streets of Los Angeles run red with the price of their connections? Mash subscribe and like right now, because what's coming will leave you emotionally destroyed in the best way possible. The explosion that ripped through Jinwoo's imported car dealership in downtown Los Angeles lit up the night sky like a second sunrise, and Amara watched it happen on the security monitors in his office, while Jinwoo stood next to her with blood dripping from a cut on his forehead and fury burning in his dark eyes like nothing she had ever seen before. Seo Yoon had made her move exactly 72 hours after Jinwoo had chosen Amara over his promise, and she hadn't come with words or negotiations or anything civilized. She had come with fire and explosives and a declaration of war that was currently burning $3 million worth of luxury vehicles into twisted metal and ash. Marcus was on the phone coordinating responses, calling in favors and moving personnel, and preparing for the retaliation that everyone knew was coming, while Zara sat in the corner with Nicole, both women pale and frightened, but refusing to leave because they understood that running now would just make them easier targets. Jinwoo had tried to send Amara away, had offered her money and a new identity and a quiet life somewhere far from Los Angeles, where Seo Yoon's rich couldn't find her. But Amara had looked at a man who had broken promises and started wars for one smile, and she had made a choice that terrified and liberated her in equal measure. If you've stayed with me this far, you deserve to see how love survives when the whole world wants it dead. So don't look away now, because this finale is going to show you that some women are made of steel, wrapped in softness, and some men learn that real power isn't about fear. It's about having someone worth protecting more than your own life. She's coming here next, Jinwoo said flatly, his voice cold and controlled despite the chaos playing out on the monitors, despite the blood running down his temple that he hadn't bothered to wipe away. The dealership was just the opening statement. She wants me to know that everything I've built can be taken away, wants me to feel what she feels, wants me to understand that choosing you over her has consequences. He turned to look at Amara, and there was something raw and desperate in his expression that made her heart ache. I need you to leave. Tonight. Right now. Marcus has a safe house in San Diego. And from there we can get you and Zara to Atlanta or New York or anywhere you want to go. I'll give you enough money to start over, to finish school, to never have to work another waitressing job if you don't want to. You'll be safe. Amara stood up from the chair she'd been sitting in, walked across the expensive office with its leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows, and did something that shocked everyone in that room, including herself. She slapped Jinwoo Park across the face, hard enough to snap his head to the side, hard enough to leave a red mark on his cheek that matched the blood from his forehead. "I'm not running," she said, her voice shaking with anger and fear, and something fiercer than both. "I'm not taking your guilt, money, and disappearing, so you can fight your war alone and probably die because you're too busy protecting me to protect yourself. You chose me, Jinwoo. You stood in that bedroom and told me I was worth every consequence, worth breaking promises and losing allies and starting wars. So now you're stuck with me, and I'm going to stand right here and make sure you survive this, because I didn't let you blow up my whole life just to watch you throw yours away." Jinwoo stared at her like she was speaking a language he didn't understand, his hand coming up to touch his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with something that looked like wonder and terror mixed together. Marcus had stopped talking on the phone. Nicole was crying quietly, and Zara was looking at her big sister with an expression of pride and fear that said she recognized the stubborn determination that had kept them alive after their mother died. "You don't understand what you're asking for," Jinwoo said quietly, but there was hope creeping into his voice now, fragile and desperate. "This isn't a movie, Amara. When Seoyoon comes, people will die. My people, her people, may be innocent people who get caught in the crossfire. She's not going to stop until either I'm dead or I'm married to her, and I would rather burn this entire city to the ground than let her have what she thinks she owns." Amara stepped closer, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, so close she could smell his cologne mixed with smoke and blood and expensive whiskey. "Then we end this," she said firmly, "not with more violence, not with more death, but with the one thing people like Seoyoon can't stand. We take away her power. We expose what she's done. We show her family that she's willing to destroy everything her father built just because she didn't get what she wanted. And we make sure that choosing revenge over honor costs her everything." It was bold and possibly stupid, and definitely dangerous, but Amara had spent her whole life being invisible and powerless, and she was done accepting that the world happened to her instead of being something she could shape with her own hands. The plan came together in whispers and phone calls and favors called in from people who owed Jinwoo their lives or their fortunes or their freedom. And by the time the sun rose over Los Angeles for the second time since the explosion, they had something that looked like a chance. Marcus had contacts in the media, journalists who had been waiting years for a chance to expose the criminal organizations that ran beneath the city's glamorous surface. Nicole knew lawyers who worked in immigration and could help process the paperwork that would finally make Amara and Zara legal residents with futures that didn't involve hiding. And Jinwoo, the feared Mafia boss who had built an empire on violence and fear, made a choice that would either save them all or destroy everything he'd ever worked for. He called a meeting with every major organization in the city, Korean and Chinese and Black and Mexican and Russian, all the powers that controlled the shadows, and he invited them to witness something that had never happened before. Seoyoon arrived at the neutral meeting ground, a private room in a downtown hotel that was swept for weapons and recording devices, and she walked in expecting to see Jinwoo broken and ready to apologize. Instead, she found him standing next to Amara, their fingers interlaced, and every major crime boss in Los Angeles watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to cold calculation. "You wanted an audience," Jinwoo said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You wanted everyone to see what happens when someone breaks a promise to you. So here we are. But I'm not apologizing, Seo-yeon. I'm asking these witnesses to hear the truth about what your father actually wanted." He pulled out a letter, old and worn, written in Korean, and he began to read. The letter was from Seo-yeon's father, written 6 months before he died, and it said things that made Seo-yeon's perfect face go pale with shock and fury. It talked about how he had never wanted to force Jinwoo into marriage, how he had seen the way his daughter's obsession had grown toxic and controlling, how his dying wish was actually for Jinwoo to find happiness and peace, not to chain himself to obligation out of. Marcus had found the letter hidden in old business files, and 3 different bosses in that room confirmed the handwriting and signature as legitimate. And Amara watched as Seo-yeon's entire narrative, her justification for war and violence and destruction, crumbled like sand in front of everyone whose respect she needed to maintain power. "You lied," one of the Chinese bosses said coldly, a woman in her 60s, who commanded more fear than most men twice her size. "You used your father's name to justify personal revenge, endangered business relationships that keep this city running, and destroyed property over a man who was never yours to claim." The verdict was clear in every face around that table. Seo-yeon had lost before she'd even realized the game had changed. She looked at Jinwoo with hatred and heartbreak and something that might have been understanding. And then she looked at Amara with an expression that was pure respect mixed with resentment. "You win," she said quietly, her perfect composure cracking just slightly. "But don't think this fairy tale ends happily ever after. His world will eat you alive, Waitress. And when it does, don't say I didn't warn you." Then she walked out, defeated but not destroyed. And Amara knew they hadn't made a friend, but they had made something more valuable. They had made an enemy who understood when to retreat. 6 months later, Amara stood in a small garden behind Jinwoo's mansion, wearing a simple white dress that Zara had helped her pick out, watching her baby sister graduate from nursing school with honors and a job offer from a prestigious hospital, and feeling like maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could happen to black girls from Jamaica who smiled at the wrong men in crowded ballrooms. Jinwoo had stepped back from the violent parts of his business, had started investing in legitimate companies and community programs and futures that didn't require blood to build. He still had enemies, still had dangers that followed him like shadows. But Amara had learned that loving someone didn't mean ignoring who they were. It meant choosing them anyway and fighting like hell to build something better. "You ready for this?" Jinwoo asked quietly, taking her hand as they watched Zara throw her graduation cap in the air, his voice soft with the kind of peace he'd never thought he'd find. Amara looked at the man who had chosen her over promises, who had risked everything for one genuine smile, who had learned that real power was having something worth protecting more than conquering, and she smiled that same smile that had started everything. "I've been ready since the moment you dropped that champagne glass," she said, and kissed him while the sun set over a city that had tried to destroy them and failed. Some love stories start with violence and chaos and bullets through windows, but the best ones end with 2 people who decided that choosing each other was worth every single consequence, and who built a life from the ashes of the world that tried to keep them apart. If this story touched your heart, if you believed in Amara and Jinwoo's journey, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, Smash that like and drop a comment telling me what moment made you feel the most. Because stories like this only matter when they're shared, and your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the end, and I'll see you in the next story where we explore more love, more redemption, and more proof that sometimes the most broken people make the most beautiful endings.